Well, happy Thanksgiving Eve.
Indeed, happy Thanksgiving Eve to everybody. Although to be honest, I could swear it was just yesterday and that it was late summer. The time has flown incredibly.
I know, right? It certainly has. And with that, we welcome all of you. Thank you for listening to Planet First Action to the start of this Thanksgiving holiday special. We are your hosts, and my name is Jacob Frost.
And I am Ryan Gordon, and welcome. And for those of you who have already been listening in from previous episodes, featuring leaders from the front lines of innovation and policy and finance, and our deep dives into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and our kickoff interview with Cam Lawrence, the CEO of Newlab, who, by the way, just won another award as Deep Tech Venture Platform of 2024. That is amazing. So congratulations, Cam, and everyone over there at Newlab. You guys are amazing. But for those of you who have been listening in, you'll know what this show is really all about.
And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, we'll reiterate that Planet First Action is a show that isn't about debating politics. It's not about debating science. It is a show that in many ways is a call to action for communities, for businesses, for our leaders, because the future is already here, whether we like it or not. The pace of change across society and technology is only going to quicken. And those new technologies, new solutions, new jobs, they aren't part of a distant vision of a far-off future. They are here today. They are impacting the way we get to work, the work we do, how we connect with each other, and how we live.
That's right. And speaking of how we live and connect with each other, again, tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and I know what that means for me, which, spoiler alert, I have a huge sweet tooth. So I'll definitely be focusing in on that sweet potato pie, apple pie, and definitely some pumpkin pie. But what do you think is the first thing you hear most of the time when you ask people about their plans for Thanksgiving?
Well, it's got to be turkey, cranberry, stuffing, maybe football.
Definitely. You will definitely be hearing some of those things. I can definitely get down with some turkey too. But as you listen for so many people, the first thing you'll hear about when you ask them about their plans around Thanksgiving is that you'll be hearing about how they're heading home to be with their family.
Yes. You know, that feeling of going home. It is something that for many of us is just so special. The place that has your childhood memories, the room that you grew up in, the cabinet where your parents may or may not still showcase your second and third place trophies.
That's right. And the kitchen table where you sat at for meals and for games of Monopoly and Risk and Catan, or which you may or may not have ended in complete and utter catastrophe.
More often than not. But it is those memories that you return to find if you're lucky. And there's something that you can find in all different kinds of homes, whether it is the house you grew up in, where you moved to, or perhaps maybe a sibling's house. They are special places in which you can center yourself.
Absolutely. And think about how massive that moment is in anyone's life. The opportunity to go and find your own home. The building, the house, the community in which you'll not only eat and rest, but create those memories and really live your life.
Exactly. You go and you think through what your priorities are. You weigh your options between renting, looking to buy and invest.
And for those who are going through that process today, are entering upon decades of evolution of that process and what a house and a home has even come to really mean and represent here in the U.S., and specifically how we build and construct our homes and how they provide for our needs and how they create community.
Exactly. And just taking it back into history, according to the City University of New York, there are key milestones that stand out from nearly every decade. But just to zoom in on a few, in 1648, the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam passes the first fire prevention law, banning wooden and plaster chimneys. Fast forward more than 100 years, in 1799, Philadelphia builder William Sansom constructs what is believed to be the first group of block-long uniform row houses in an American city along Walnut Street. In 1820, Hezekiah Pierpont divides 60 acres in Brooklyn Heights into lots measuring 25 by 100 feet, designed for row houses with backyards. The resulting homes comprised the first New York suburb. He required that the houses be built with brick instead of the more common wood, thus attracting more prosperous residents.
Love stuff like that. The little bit of trivia is just so amazing. And also, did you happen to know another fun fact about brownstones and why they all have stairs that walk up to the first floor? The stoop was actually essential for city housing in the late 1800s because of the horses. Stoops kept homeowners further away from the horse manure and the rats and the flies and the fleas that came along with it. So for something to be grateful for when you look back on how far we've come, according to a New Yorker's 2009 article, and it described the life in the 1800s, it said in vacant lots, horse manure was piled as high as 60 feet. It lined city streets like banks of snow, and in the summertime, it must have stunk to the heavens.
Well, now, thank you very much for describing that image and omitting the portion about how the rain would then cause it to seep into people's basements.
That's because that is gross.
And speaking of addressing sanitary conditions, that's been a major focus of policy and continues to this day. Back in 1842, Dr. John H. Grissom, a housing reformer who served as the city inspector of New York, wrote the sanitary condition of the laboring population of New York, recommending that landlords improve the degree of light and ventilation in housing. And then in the 1930s, laws were passed supporting initiatives to promote home ownership through private sector programs, and in 1932, President Hoover signed the Federal Home Loan Bank Act. And in 1934, the Federal Housing Administration was created to provide mortgages. And then in December 15th, 1961, just looking at how the landscape here has changed in New York City, that was when the revised New York City zoning law took effect. And it divided the city into residential, commercial, and manufacturing districts. And to gain more public open space, the law permitted builders to increase the height of buildings. And then in a marquee year that many of us know dearly is that April 11th, 1968, the Fair Housing Act banned the discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin.
Yeah, all those things are just so amazing, and it really kind of brings to the fore how important and how we've seen technology really march along during the time, and also how that's ushered in and reflected in these social changes and policies. And in addition to those kind of societal and kind of policy changes, architectural and construction methods and the design, they have been constantly evolving. Beyond the switch to brick row houses and building upwards, you have someone like William LeBaron Jenney, a Chicago architect who designed the first skyscraper in 1884. 9 stories high, the Home Life Insurance Building was the first structure whose entire weight, including the exterior walls, was supported on an iron frame. From row houses to houseboats to brownstones to skyscrapers, from the urban centers to the suburbs, the history of housing and the homes in the U.S. is one in which has been constantly pushed for increased inventory to meet the growing needs and the improved quality and the standards for people's health and well-being.
And that evolution isn't stopping. In fact, the innovation behind building more affordable, sustainable, and healthy housing is only increasing.
That's right, from new materials to the types of partnerships, policies, and construction methods like modular prefabrication, all work to advance the sector.
And good thing too, because not only is the built environment one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, according to a 2023 Pew survey, the country is currently coping with a shortage estimated to be between 4 and 7 million homes.
Wow, 4 to 7 million homes. That is an absolutely massive shortage. And that is part of the reason why we are so excited for this Thanksgiving holiday special, focused in specifically on that need, what houses mean for families as they build memories from living and working and becoming homes, and to zero in on the company that is really leading the charge to overcome those challenges, and more is Assembly OSM.
That is right. It is amazing because we got the chance to tour their first-of-a-kind building in Brooklyn, New York. We'll be able to see firsthand their innovative solutions and know what it's like to step inside their first prototype to New York City's Modular skyscrapers, which was stacked up in 24 hours.
We'll learn from Alexandra Donovan, Assembly OSM's design and innovation lead, and Eddie Palka, who leads the Housing Lab at Columbia and is project director for Assembly OSM.
I know, I'm excited. And in the second part of this Thanksgiving special coming out this weekend, we'll be speaking with Andrew Staniforth, the CEO of Assembly OSM, on stage at Newlab about the business and its role and opportunities going forward, and then conclude the special with some bonus content from the community that lives and works just nearby Assembly OSM's brand new building in Brooklyn.
Yep. And with all that said, again, thank you so much for joining us today. Please like and share and subscribe. And now please join us as we head down to Felix Street in Brooklyn and walk through and witness history in the making.
Great to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Great to see you.
Hey,
Great to see you.
nice to meet
It's a
you.
pleasure. Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
Thank you so much for having us here. We are so excited. Before we get into anything else, tell our audience please, your names, where you work for, what's your title, what are you doing? And then we'd love to get into, we're so excited to get into the building and talk about it.
Sure. My name is Donovan. I'm lead design and innovation at Assembly. The architectural design and innovation team, we evaluate projects for feasibility of whether they make sense to be modular, and we lead sustainability, R&D, innovative partnerships, and we set design intent for our current projects, but also kind of 2, 3, 4 projects ahead to understand what we should be designing to and where the market's headed.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm Eddie Palka, so I'm a project director and architect at Assembly OSM. So really taking what Alex and her team does and then carry it through to actually make sure we execute it and stay on time and on budget.
There you go.
So
hard work.
That's what I say.
As we already mentioned, we are here in Brooklyn, which Ryan knows much better than I in terms of that history. Where exactly are we again?
So this is actually Fort Greene inside Brooklyn. So this is amazing, just off of Fulton. And then also just an amazing place to be, because what you have is you have the Barclays Center right here. You have the Atlantic Center, which is basically amazing for just what's going on with the amenities. You have your food, you basically have everything you could possibly want. And then Fort Greene is just an amazing place just in general inside Brooklyn. So it's absolutely fantastic. So we're looking forward to going in and like checking out what you guys have been doing.
Yeah,
Sounds
let's
great.
do it.
Let's
Head
check
in?
it out. We gotta get right in.
Yeah. All right, so come on in.
Perfect.
So this is one of the 2 duplex units. So they of course share that entryway and then up the stairs into one of the 2 units. And so this is the open living dining room. And then you have the kitchen over here. And then we'll eventually make it up to the 3rd floor where we'll see the bedrooms.
Awesome. Well, as you can see, basically they're actually still under construction. So you can see how it's all going to be coming together. But also one of the primary questions we want to ask is actually what brought you to OSM in the first place? What brought you to Assembly? And then also, from a modular perspective, why did you decide to go that way as opposed to something more conventional?
Sure. I mean, both of us started our careers at shop architects.
Okay.
And so I got pulled in when what would become Assembly was very much an R&D land. And as soon as I started working on it, I was hooked. It was very interdisciplinary and innovative, and it has really allowed us to wear so many hats and be on the front lines of building more sustainably.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then as Alex mentioned, so I was also at shop architect. So I got pulled in a little bit later than Alex, but also from the shop side and worked basically on and off with Assembly for a few years, going back to, I think, 2019. And so, shop architects does a lot of incredible, varied projects. So they're all very exciting, but they're all very, very different. And so I really saw Assembly as an opportunity to really drill down into one specific thing and focus and gain a deeper knowledge. And then also seeing, the innovative interdisciplinary work and really the focus on both sustainability and a project typology that really addresses, the affordable housing crisis, which particularly in New York is a very severe issue.
Yeah.
So it really just brought all of those together and seemed like a place to be.
That's amazing. I know you actually, I believe you spent some time actually as a professor at Columbia. Do you see common threads in terms of the work that you were doing while at Columbia with what you're applying now?
Yeah, so I'm a research assistant in the housing lab at Columbia. So we're focused on exactly that, the affordable housing crisis, particularly in New York City. And that's also looking at, how policy can influence what gets built in the city and is more of that sort of urban scale lens then really influences what can be implemented at the architectural scale.
Right. No, that's so interesting. And I think also just to that aspect, I mean, we talked a little bit about sustainability, one of the reasons why you decided to come to Assembly, and also just one of the main advantages of this building. So let's drill down a little bit on that. So talk to us a little bit about kind of more the sustainable aspects of kind of what makes this building unique.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to take some of the...
Sure. I mean, we can start with, it is striving for a passive house certification, which of course is all about having a very tight envelope and well compartmentalized units. So, and then coupling that with fresh air and excellent sort of mechanical systems that achieve a very high quality experience on the interiors. And ultimately, it's achieving lower operational carbon and savings. So then, in addition to that, it's an all-electric building. And maybe we can go over to the kitchen and...
Well, before we go, for those who may not be familiar what an envelope is, a building envelope, or not involved in the space, so really what that's about is how much air can get in or out. And you may not be able to tell this from the watching the interview, but it's actually quite warm in here because of how well insulated and well sealed it is. And so that's what you mean when you talk about envelope. It's where there's sort of cracks between different materials, like in the windows, making sure there's not that airflow that's passing that you don't want.
Exactly. So there's very thick insulation in the facade. And then we spend a lot of time making sure every single crack is air sealed very well. And that happens at the facade and also between the units. So again, this building is 2 units, so all the demising walls in between, there's a higher degree of attention paid to joints than in a typical building.
Right. And I think we mentioned this outside, but just the actual address of the building. This is 147 Felix. And so this, as you can see from the final protection that's on the flooring and on the walls, that this really is right about to be done. That's the finishing touches right now. What can you guys share about the timing of this?
Yeah, so we're very close to getting our TCO for the project. So we did, I think a week or 2 ago, we had our DOB construction walkthrough. So that's basically where the DOB inspector comes through to make sure that the building is habitable and safe before issuing TCO's temporary certificate of occupancy. So that's usually the big milestone that a project is really complete. What we're waiting on here is just the commissioning of the mechanical systems. So that's required by the city to make sure that the mechanical, plumbing, electrical systems are all operating and functioning. And then with this passive house layer, there's additional testing. So we're just working to commission that system. And then there are basically inspections associated with that. And that's our last thing. So we're really just on the brink of it right now.
Right, it's exciting. It is. So what actually is really interesting about this particular unit is, one, the method that you guys actually employ in order to kind of get this done, what makes Assembly OSM unique. And then also the fact that at the end of the day, this is the first one.
Yes.
This is actually kind of what the pilot is for what you guys actually want to be. So talk a little bit about, one, kind of what makes that is, kind of what modular and kind of what modular skyscrapers happens to be. And then also kind of why you chose this site and kind of where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually in a landmarked district of Fort Greene, which is unusual for our building type. We're usually striving for more of kind of the 12 to 30 story range, but we chose this site and we entered a joint venture with a partner here to make it very much a pilot project and actually test our high-rise system. So we say it's the strongest building in the neighborhood at 3 stories. There's one ground level that is built conventionally out of concrete, and then on top of that we stacked 8 mods to make up the 2 units. So, and landmarks, I think is important to mention, was a process to get the brick approved and all of that detailing.
Yeah, so very stringent requirements. And the project had actually previously been approved not as a modular design. So we had to go through a redesign process to sort of make it work with our modular system while also, staying true to the previous design so that landmarks would still approve it. And there were other, requirements like Alex pointing out the brick that you noticed on the facade that I know, makes it a little harder to identify it as a modular project, right? So landmarks insisted that got hand laid on site. But generally, we're great partners through the process, to be able to do something innovative structurally and from a development perspective, but then still have it be totally contextual to the neighborhood.
That's an important thing. I know it's something we've talked about with you guys before in terms of how you want to create buildings that are not just amazing buildings, but they're loved by the community, they're part of the community. And so when you're looking around, but you just mentioned how it's contextual, if you look out the windows, you see the bricks of all the nearby buildings, there's the cohesiveness, there's the cohesion in terms of the way that it looks and the aesthetic appeal of it, which is a beautiful thing. Maybe we walk toward the kitchen, and then I keep diving in on that idea of the modular, because that's something that's crazy in terms of applying it in this context, in this world. And maybe it makes sense when it comes to people think of like, oh, out in the country, there's some space, I'm gonna just bring a bunch of things and stack them together. But this is totally different. And walking around this, you would not expect what it looks like, what it feels like to be modular. So how do you match up modular with the future of what that is in terms of being able to have beautiful designs and also do it in a city making a skyscraper? What does that look like?
Sure. So we're very focused on dense urban environments because we believe in increasing, densifying existing cities so we can leave more land, left alone untouched. And to do that, it's high rise, and it's also being adaptable to all different shapes and sizes of sites that you encounter in the city. So for that, we've standardized our sort of core and shell of our system as much as possible to achieve economies of scale, to achieve efficient processes in our manufacturing facility. And then we've left the layouts, so layouts to site, layouts to units, and interior finishes and the enclosure design, so the exterior of the building, as customizable as possible because we don't want any assembly building to look like it was copy or pasted. So we're achieving modular and all of its efficiencies, and it's much smoother process and shorter construction timeline, but ultimately it's a building that can be designed to any context.
Yeah, it's amazing. You guys are kind of redefining a whole bunch of categories all at once.
Yeah.
What people think about modular to begin with.
Exactly. Well, let's actually drill down on actually what modular is for our audience. So really what we're talking about when you say modular is that you've literally built this building somewhere else and you brought it through Manhattan
Yes.
into Brooklyn.
Yeah. So I think, to talk about that a little bit more. So where I'm standing right now is the dividing line between two of our mods. So you probably didn't notice it as you stepped in, but basically this is one mod, this is another mod. Wall to wall is all one mod. So, they're roughly sized to fit on a truck bed, and then we, assemble them. It's in our name, in our facility in Harrison, New Jersey. And then basically they got trucked over the George Washington Bridge overnight, and then stacked in, I think, 10 hours, all 8 mods. So everything, this kitchen came fully in the mod, finished floor here. The threshold was put in on site, and basically this trim cap was put in on site. But all of the other finishes you see came in the mods from the facility. And I know, as Alex was saying, this is also, we're targeting larger projects. So these are very unique layouts because it's the sort of townhouse duplex typology. Obviously, multifamily development, it lends itself to very different layouts. So I think it also just attests to the sort of flexibility we have with our system to adapt to these different conditions. That, again, is super critical when you're in the sort of dense urban environment, right?
Right. And I think worth mentioning that in our factory, which is out in Harrison, New Jersey, before we're even assembling there, we're working with a network of suppliers that are building things like the kitchen they're prefabricating. So they're making kitchen pods, fully finished bathroom pods, which we'll see in a moment, that we are then assembling. That's where that comes from, with very little fabrication, very little welding or wet work. As much as possible, this is a clean process happening out in our facility.
Right. And then how does that actually help from a sustainability perspective?
Yeah, so on the sustainability front, one of the things we've really seen is that lots of modular projects have just taken outdoor construction and moved it indoors, and that still has all of the waste, I think everyone's used to seeing on a construction site, right? It's not the cleanest place. There's lots of cutoff, not efficiencies in material use, and even, tracking of waste. So with the way we operate, we're really looking at the supply chain all the way down and fine-tuning all of the manufacturing processes to make sure that we're running a much more lean process that reduces and eliminates all of that waste. And then that also translates to the time and effort on site to make sure that we're minimizing, even trucks idling on site to bring in all of these various trades.
Right. So how much time did you actually shave off when you actually consider how you do this particular process versus something more traditional?
Yeah, I think, our model, again, of our mid to high rise projects, we anticipate basically like a 30 to 50% reduction in overall timeline. And that really comes from being able to start this on-site work. So again, Alex talked about how the cellar and the first floor were done conventionally in concrete. So that work basically starts concurrent with us beginning to procure everything in our facility. And then, at that rate of 8 to 10 mods per day being stacked, that we sync that up with the completion of the podium. So instead of, having all of that time for concrete to go up and then have all of the trades lag behind, we're instead doing 8, 10 mods a day, and then just coming in to do this finish work of really, making connections for mechanical systems between mods and doing that final commissioning.
It's amazing.
I was just going to say there's a huge reduction also in pollution. So actual particulate pollution and noise pollution, and then the traffic disruption that's so typical for a construction site. So we really think about the impact to the community and the minimized impact really of construction that can happen with modular.
Right. And it's amazing. So you mentioned at the very beginning the improvements in the envelope seal as being one of the core things. It's like this is something that's much better and a differentiator. You've mentioned now the process of building it in the first place, all the benefits that come with it that you just talked through. And you mentioned already also that this is an all-electric building. So what does that What does that mean to someone?
Yes, so it's all electric except for a gas-powered generator, emergency generator required by code. So we have, induction stovetops. All the appliances are otherwise electric, and in addition to that, there's the electricity piece, and then for higher quality of living, we have WELL certification is part of our kind of sustainability objectives. So we have very low VOC finishes in here that are not off-gassing, none of the laminates. The wood floor is very thoughtfully selected. It's an engineered wood floor as opposed to like an LVT, which is primarily plastic. So paints, all of those things are considered, as well as we're selecting as much as we can based on strong EPDs for low carbon.
That's amazing. I mean, just hearing you describe that, I can see people who are watching this now and listening to you describe this, they're thinking, well, how do I get one of those for myself? So, I mean, I know you guys have plans. This is the pilot. There's much more that's in the pipeline right now. But is this something that's going to be available for someone who says, look, I love what you guys are building. Can I use you guys to build my house? Does it need to be in a city?
Yeah. So, our sweet spot and what we're targeting really is that mid to high rise market. So primarily developers, we'll of course let everyone know when our high rises are coming online so they can rent. But I think, we also see that market, I think, as you're talking about for single family homes is quite saturated with players. And it's also, we've spent a lot of time developing our structural system, again, specifically for that mid to high rise market. And that is overkill for the sort of single family kind of market, right? And I think that goes back to also this, housing affordability crisis, right, and this premise that really cities are the answer and where the problem is most severe, and that there's great benefit in that density. And so that's really where we're putting our effort.
So you mentioned that we are very close to final completion. It looks like there's a few final things that are still being worked on. Tell us about what are those final steps, and also how do they tie back to really who OSM is in terms of the product you're building?
Sure. Yeah. So right here you can see some work we're doing basically to replace a defective conditioning unit for the space. So this is really our holdup right now on getting all of our energy inspections and everything buttoned up. But I think really what you can see here is the sort of engine of the project, right? And this is very tied into, again, this passive house certification and sort of, again, having this very tight building envelope. And then as I was talking about, the VOCs, that has a tendency to potentially make people sick in a building, right? And because of that, passive house requires you to have separate systems for heating and cooling a space versus ventilating. So we basically have a lot of stuff in here of two independent systems, one that does heating and cooling and one that's giving you a constant flow of fresh air to make sure that it's a really comfortable and healthy interior environment. And so in addition to that, here we have all of our downlights, electrical, sprinkler system, which also the sprinkler system was even added into this project, really as a model for how we do high-rise, not required on a building of this scale, but to really work through that coordination, integration of all of those systems. And you can also see how this is, again, right on this mate line between the two mods. So this is really the larger living space, right? Higher ceiling, and then basically pack everything into this mod where it's all of the engine and the sort of guts of the building that make it run.
Right. So what's really interesting about what you mentioned about the passive house and also this particular system is kind of the implications around like COVID, right? What actually happened around that. And basically there was some issues about what's actually like, what maybe some issues possibly passive houses may have had in that kind of situation. So explain that in terms of how they were kind of
Yeah, so I think, one of the things we're constantly contending with is this, maybe perceived tension between sort of energy efficiency and wellness, right? So you see it in something like this of, do you seal a building incredibly tightly and then you're maybe having this off-gassing, right? We're trying to do both, which takes a lot of work. And you also see that, with the facade, and passive house sort of pushes you to have smaller, fewer windows, right? Because they want that R value, the insulative value of a solid wall. But we also know people like sunlight, right? And they like views. So again, trying to find that sweet spot of bringing those two together and not going full bore into one, because I think, we know if we do a incredibly high performing passive house building, but it's a interior environment that no one wants to live in, that's going to be worse than not doing passive house at all, right?
Right. And it's amazing because listening to you and hearing all of the things that you've already shared, from Passive House to the WELL certification to this being landmark to this also being in New York, it feels like you guys picked the hardest possible place from terms of certifications and requirements and regulations to do your pilot. Was that part of the strategy? Is like do it in the hardest place first and prove it there?
Yes, actually, I think a big part of assembly strategy is to be building in New York, being one of the most challenging jurisdictions in the country, certainly, and also this site. And I think that's very much at the core of what architects and designers do, often on every project, right? Like we've chosen some very tricky challenges here, but that puzzle are the constraints that we typically are working within. And we are trying to leverage all the work that goes into a project for repeatability and not lose all of that bespoke work on a one-off project, which is what's typical. So our projects won't look the same, but a lot of our lessons learned and IP is shared DNA throughout kind of our projects.
No, it actually brings up another really important question, especially for everyone that's working in the built environment right now, is the fact that when you go from one city to the next, the rules, requirements completely change. And then take that at the state level, it goes even farther. So are you thinking that by having sort of solved for New York, that you've kind of necessarily opened up a number of other jurisdictions just because it's going to at least meet, if not exceed, requirements there?
Yes. So generally, the answer is yes. But as we enter any new market, we do an evaluation of, okay, what is different about code in this state than we're used to in New York? So there tend to be some slight differences. Sometimes they're more relaxed codes, which ultimately, have some cost savings. But sometimes California, we're dealing with seismic, so we make sure to have a line of our building system or understand what adjustments we need to make for a seismic appropriate design.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, should we head upstairs?
Let's head upstairs.
Yeah.
About what's going on from kind of a policy perspective, when you actually start thinking about how you go outside of this jurisdiction inside New York, what some of the things you have to think about. One of the bigger things that we've been talking about on Planet First Action and some of the other segments is also about Local Law 97 and how important that's going to be, just generally speaking, for, okay, well, what are we going to do for more of a sustainable future, like as a country? But also it's, inherently different for every single city. So talk a little bit about what it means here in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I think Local Law 97 in New York, we think about it really, again, coming from that building scale and how we can make, again, energy efficient buildings, but really that move to being all electric, we really see as the key, because Local Law 97 is regulating carbon emissions for projects, right? And is also getting incrementally more stringent over time. Mm-hmm. So what that does is it ties the building scale of electrification into the more general energy mix of the state, right? So we're trying to do our part at the building scale, and then really looking to the state and on the policy side to help change the energy mix of the electrical grid to become more renewable based. And there are plans for that, but plans don't always come to fruition. So I think that's really where we see the bulk of the action needed, and that what we can really do is, again, build things energy efficiently, but really that key is having all electric.
Well, and again, I mean, that actually brings back to one of the core benefits for you guys, right? So as more of these kinds of laws actually get passed and put in place, then it basically means your guys' system and the way that you actually construct things are going to be more beneficial.
Yep. And I think we want to make sure, I think the one maybe concern is that there would be a cooling effect on development from the stringent nature of these requirements, right? And so again, being able to efficiently deliver these energy efficient projects, to be able to also do things that make sense from a developer perspective is really essential to, again, we talked about that sort of tension between potentially like wellness and energy efficiency. Right. There's also that affordability component that is really central to what we're doing. And it's sort of solving those all simultaneously. And I think that's where we see, a lot of potential support from the government, right? And how they can help incentivize these developments and not only have them be what's not allowed, but giving sort of preferential rates or grants, whatever it might be, to projects that are really leading the way and sort of being those market changers that make it that much easier for everyone else to follow.
Right, because one of the challenges of innovation is it tends to be more expensive upfront, right? So we're trying to get ahead of this. We're trying to establish affordability as early on as we can, but it's a ramp, and those incentives could be extremely helpful early on to make things come to market faster. Mm-hmm.
Well, another way to also look at that is that it's almost insurance for the developer, right?
Absolutely.
So if you actually you're already ahead of the code,
exactly.
Then what it is, you actually beating the system. You're more or less kind of outpacing those policies. So those developers have a little bit more peace of mind. In terms
Yes.
of saying, okay, well, look, you know what, we're going to be good. We don't necessarily have to, refurbish or refit kind of an existing building.
Right,
And
it's future proofing.
We've done some sort of initial analyses. Again, Local Law 97, it doesn't fully chart out what each incremental step is, but seeing what those likely would be and how future-proofed we are, and in a sort of back of the napkin way, like, are the buildings we're designing right now future-proofed to not incur any of those fines in the year 2050? Right. And we think we're about there. Again, there's a lot that changes over the next 25 years, but that's really where we're trying to position ourselves exactly for that future-proofing.
Well, it's interesting because we've been talking a lot about the market that's been changed by government regulations and mandates and those sort of incentives, but at the same time, there's also a massive change that's happening just in terms of what consumers want. Awesome. So we head up to, this is also before we head up, this is another bedroom within the unit. There's a bathroom that's just adjoining right over there. It's a beautiful space, especially in New York. For anyone who knows New York real estate, but shall we head up to the next floor?
Sure. Yeah. Why don't we actually just take a quick spin? That way you guys can take a quick look at the bathroom and see what that looks like.
So this bathroom actually not only came fully finished to the site, but came fully finished to our facility in Harrison, New Jersey from a bathroom pod supplier. So like tile, grout, mirror on the wall, everything is complete, which is pretty amazing. So we'll continue down here. We have a den/office space with great light. And then there's a second bedroom in here with its closet and built-in millwork. One more bathroom, also fully finished bathroom pod interior. And we'll head up to the roof.
And what about the wood, the floors?
Oh yeah, so these are engineered wood floors, white oak, and that means they're incredibly resilient, but also primarily actual real wood.
And what you just mentioned, I think that's actually important to double down for everyone listening in terms of the fact that bathroom pod showed up to your facility fully done.
Yes.
And so it really is taking all of the steps and distributing them as much as possible. It's really redefining what modular is. There's no one else that's doing it like that. Really. You guys are pioneering this new approach, and it makes a lot of sense financially, as we've talked about, but also just in terms of the operational efficiencies to be able to stand these buildings up as quickly as you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're trying to leverage existing supply chains where it makes sense. So bathroom pods actually, they serve conventional buildings like hotels going into concrete buildings, but it makes the most sense for bringing it into our facility where we can just focus on the technology of how we crane in a bathroom pod and efficiently place it, to the 16th inch of tolerance to then be connected on site.
It's amazing. And keep going, but it's just it brings to mind a lot of the conversations happening in the sustainability space right now are about supply chains and supply chain resilience. And so you guys are actually future-proofing for that as well.
Yeah, so we have a whole supply chain team that works directly with our network of suppliers, which all of those relationships are really the bread and butter of how all of this comes to be. But we also see so much potential in leveraging our digital modeling to embed metadata early on, like your carbon footprint of every material. We understand exactly what's going into the building and can anticipate what the LCA, the carbon footprint of the building will be, and also traceability for supply chain. So that extends to even construction is one of the sectors with one of the most opaque supply chains and the highest rates of forced labor. And both by leveraging our relationships with suppliers and also tracing the components and where they're coming from throughout the life of a building, we'd really like to make some strides in that department.
It's amazing. You're tackling all of the hard issues all at once in the way you're kind of taking on some of those.
We're trying.
Bring them all together like that.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about just kind of where you see the workforce coming in the future. And at the end of the day, you guys are being innovative, right? So this is kind of brand new space. So as that is, how can you actually help, and what do you guys actually are trying to do in terms of bringing more people into this space, and how can they get a little bit more acquainted in terms of some of these new technologies and also just some of the new materials?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the role of designers is expanding and will continue to expand as we're in this sort of new frontier in, combating the climate crisis. I think also a lot about what we're doing at Assembly is trying to standardize processes and quality control that can actually bring in people coming from all sorts of different backgrounds to be part of the workforce in our facilities. So less differentiated labor that can get on board and learn quickly in a more standardized and safer and sort of more pleasant environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that sort of flexibility, right, and adaptability is really just becoming more and more critical, right? And I think both from architecture backgrounds, we sort of have that somewhat inherently from the way we're sort of taught, but I think that gets taken to the sort of nth degree at a place like Assembly where you're not just working with architects, engineers, you're working directly with the supply chain team. You're working with these people who come from, the automotive or aerospace industry, and just like the way you communicate information, what information is relevant, extraneous, is just you really get to understand the wildly different perspectives everyone has, and being able to sort of understand and put yourself in their shoes and sort of all come together and tackle a problem, collectively, I think is really like what's most needed now.
Yeah,
it's amazing because we're kind of in the community, listening to the sounds of the community as we talk, also listening to some of the sounds of more traditional construction methods while we're talking. One of the things that struck me, though, throughout this entire conversation is when you're talking to both of you, the experts and the leaders that you are, you could easily miss the fact that your true background is actually in architecture and design. You are policy experts, you are experts in supply chains, you are experts in sustainability, all of these things, right? And so I guess to think about aspiring architects, to think about people who maybe want to get into this field, what was the thing that got you here, or what advice could you share that helps them kind of make that next step to get into working in this space?
Yeah, I would say we think a lot about breaking down silos, and the construction and real estate industries are full of silos and sort of teams arbitrarily pitted against each other in the way that projects get structured and financing works. So we, I think, really get to enjoy such an interdisciplinary team under one roof, and then also collaborate with partners early on in a process. And so I think I was craving that as I made the move to assembly from a more traditional architecture practice. And for aspiring designers, I would say, like, follow your nose, follow your gut. Things are changing and things are blending across the industry.
Fantastic.
I have nothing to add. Nailed it.
Nailed it. Perfect.
And what about for the policymakers in terms of the advice for them? I mean, it affects so much of your work, which you have to comply with, as you're also trying to design beautiful buildings that achieve the objectives for communities. What would you share in terms of what would you wish might be different, or what would you wish they'd think about in terms of the next round of things that roll through?
One thing that we talk about a lot is prescriptive code versus performative code. So our code in the States is very prescriptive. And so if we had performative code that said, you need to design this and this thing to this criteria, performance criteria, as opposed to this pre-approved list of materials that have already been tested, it leaves more space for innovation, for innovative materials to come online sooner. So that's something we run into a lot. And the code's also not written for modular, so that's we're in constant conversation with the authority having jurisdiction, so the Department of Buildings in New York, to get them comfortable with our system. So writing into code some flexibility for innovation to come into play would be really valuable.
Yeah.
That's honestly it feels like a golden nugget of wisdom that policymakers should absolutely pay attention to, because it gets right at the chafing point between the fact that we want to have all these new innovative solutions, want to bring sustainability out, we want to create these new things that didn't exist before, but if they are new, they're not going to be on those pre-prescribed lists.
Right.
And then you can't use them. And so that is a blockage of actually being able to achieve the goals that those policymakers are setting out with their sustainability policies. So that idea of designing your policy to achieve a goal, not to meet a certain specific outline requirement in terms of what's being used, makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So, well, thank you, first of all, both of you, for having such a fantastic interview and sharing time with us. But before we let you go, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in this neighborhood and really kind of what makes it so unique. So again, we talked a little bit about it outside, but this is Fort Greene. And there's so many different kinds of buildings. The history here is just amazing. This used to be a tobacco field. I don't know if you guys actually realized
Did not know that.
Yeah, this is a huge tobacco plantation that came through and actually just decided to really gentrified through World War II because of what happened with the Navy Yard.
Navy Yard, wow.
And that's actually generated basically all this neighborhood, right? So what's also interesting is that because during that time period, there's many different kinds of buildings. There's very many different styles.
Yeah.
So talk about how this actually fits in with kind of the wider community and how you try and mix kind of what's going on with these wonderful row houses and brownstones versus the Barclay Center, which is literally just across the street.
Yeah. So, in a very sort of practical way, we are in a historic landmark district. So that again goes back to Landmarks Preservation Commission, approved everything we did on the exterior of this building. And so, that is basically, there are specific neighborhoods throughout Brooklyn, throughout New York City that are designated this way. And any new development needs to sort of be in kind with what's been done there traditionally. And so that, just speaks to the sort of heritage of this being identified as one of those places. But then, as you're also saying, We're right across the street from Atlantic Terminal, so this is, I believe, the second busiest MTA station in the city after either Times Square or Penn Station.
Yeah.
And then Barclay Center is 1 block further over, and you're basically a stone's throw from downtown Brooklyn and Fort Greene Park. So you're really like in the thick of it in Brooklyn, but also in the smaller scale, more residential, historic district.
And so, Alex, we know we've got we've got Climate Week NYC just around the corner. It's going to be all focused on really the future of innovation in a lot of ways when it comes to sustainability. And with that, I want to talk to you both about your perspective about the future of innovation. Assembly OSM has done so much already to bring about the front lines of what that innovation is. But there's a lot of work in new materials, in new requirements for policy. How do you think about bringing all of those things together? And what excites you most about the future of innovation?
Yeah, so we see our building system as an infrastructure where we actually have a lot of control over what goes into the core and shell. And so we'd love to, and we are working with partners to develop materials that are then ready to sort of slot in. So we're collaborating with a lab at the University of Maine on some bio-based materials for 3D printing at a construction scale, also some alternatives that are bio-based to gypsum board. So our buildings right now are full of mined and finite materials, and we'd really love to start to offset those, right, with more carbon sequestering materials. And I would say the other big one for us is mass timber. We have a hot rolled steel structure that is like begging for infill that is in CLT, mass timber panels for floors, walls, and ceilings, but code in the States right now, in New York City, has only adopted up to 8 stories in height. And so we're waiting for New York to adopt the International Building Code limit of 12 or 18 stories, where it would make sense for us to start bringing in timber, which can sequester carbon in the process, into our building system.
Amazing. And so as someone who's lived in New York City can confirm that this rooftop is an enviable asset for anyone living here, and it is a beautiful space. And so tell us more about the rooftop itself, but also just really what the building we've just walked through. We saw it; it's beautiful. But what does it actually consist of? How many units are there? What's it going to be used for?
Yeah,
Tell
sure.
us more about it.
Yeah, so the project is really primarily 2 residential units, so 2 duplexes that are basically mirror images of one another. So we came in at level 1, came upstairs into the units where you have living room, dining room, kitchen, and a bathroom on that floor. And then up to the 3rd floor, we had the 2 bedrooms, one with an ensuite bathroom, a shared bathroom, 2nd bedroom, and a den/work area. And then that brings us up to the rooftop, which, yes, is the sort of rarest amenity here in New York. And so this, again, is split between the 2 sides, so private for each of the 2 units. And then in addition to that, there's a 2-car garage down at level 1, so each unit gets a 1-car spot. So if you think a rooftop location is rare in New York, you got a garage too. Yeah. And then on the corner, there's a small community facility. So that's basically a tenant space that we're looking to lease right now. And that's really about bringing sort of commercial activity to the corner, right, and bring life to the street and to help activate the neighborhood. And I think exactly as Alex is saying, like, we have all of these ideas of all of these products we want to integrate, but then again, back to the point about prescriptive versus performative codes, right? It's once we're doing modular, we've already added this challenge of approvals that we need. So we didn't talk much about that, but to do our modular projects, we need to get discretionary approval from the city every time. So once we're adding a layer of sort of innovative materials on top of that, it just adds another layer of sort of red tape at the city level. And again, that is different in every jurisdiction we go to. So it's really about how we can incrementally change the industry to make each of those moves more and more feasible and viable to make them the sort of standard moving forward.
It also goes back to what you were talking about earlier about that kind of ingrained IP. It is not necessarily just on what you put down and what you actually make, but also the relationships and the contracts you've already kind of established as well.
Absolutely.
So those kind of inherent things are also just net benefits as you go through.
Amazing. We have one last question for you. And again, as Ryan mentioned, thank you so much for taking the time to walk through this beautiful building and sharing all of this amazing insights. The last question is we're about to head over and have our conversation with Assembly OSM's CEO, Andrew Staniforth. And we know he's just an absolutely inspiring leader. When he gets on a stage, he controls the room.
So true.
So what is it like to work for Andrew? It must be incredible.
I mean, Andrew has an amazing depth of knowledge in not only development, but New York real estate. And also in innovation, he worked for Sidewalk Labs at Google on the Toronto Waterfront District, also in CLT and Mass Timber. And so he's incredibly ambitious. He's incredibly connective. He always says that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so he's very much working across other companies and other entities to make sure we're all collaborating as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, he's a delightful guy to work for and to know. And I think, as Alex is saying, he has such a depth of knowledge, again, from like the real estate and the tech perspective, and can dive right in, talking with architects, engineers, and like really get into the weeds when necessary and helpful. And really just has that like wide breadth of knowledge that I don't know how he got it, but he has it.
No, that's amazing. I think that it goes right to the heart of what we're trying to do with Planet First Action, because it is about that interdisciplinary expertise. It is about breaking down silos. It's about bringing different disciplines together so that action can actually happen in this short term. And so you guys are living embodiments of that as architects who are really speaking expertly about all of the policy, sustainability sides of things. You yourselves are amazing leaders doing that already. And Assembly OSM is just one of the preeminent companies that's on the front lines and embodies that. So thank you again for the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
What an incredible building. Built with visionary leaders at Assembly OSM, it is absolutely inspiring to see it firsthand, and we can't wait to dive even deeper into the business with Assembly OSM CEO Andrew Staniford.
I know, they kind of had to push me out, to be honest. I wanted to just stay there. It really was amazing. But yes, thank you to all of you so much for tuning in to this episode of Planet First Action. Please share with your family and friends, and be sure to subscribe, because we have some amazing episodes in store for this sort of informal second half of season 1. Because we have more to come with this Thanksgiving special, and then after that, the leaders we speak to and learn from have us spanning the world, from work by Italian artisans revitalizing a traditional craft to the entrepreneurs of a small country in Africa that are driving outsized impact and recognition, to the innovators here in the U.S. who are not just pioneering but deploying the technologies of the future to address EV charging infrastructure needs across the country today.
That's right. I can't wait. And to be sure to subscribe, and also head over to planetfirstaction.com for even more content and insight to catch up on previous episodes. But for now, we here at Planet First Action wish you a wonderful and restful Thanksgiving. We certainly are grateful for your support, and we look forward to being with you on our next show.
Now, off to go work on that turkey.
There you go. Gobble, gobble.